All right, let's begin section 1.3, analyzing complex texts. So the goal of this section is to write an essay in Revision Assistant. So we don't have access to Revision Assistant in the classroom. You'll have it at home because you've got access to the internet. But in the classroom, Revision Assistant is blocked. So basically, let's walk through the concepts that you would use to write the essay, because that's what the test is going to be over. Okay, so the idea here is that there are two articles. There's this text one, 7 qualities of being a good leader, or 7 qualities of a good leader, and text 2, the railroad runs to Canada, from a biography of Harriet Tubman, who you should remember from history was one of the principal players of the Underground Railroad, getting slaves to escape to safety in Canada. Sometimes in the North, but then there were laws during those times that required, it was called the Fugitive Slave Act, that required people to return slaves from the North to the South. So let's look at Railroad runs to Canada. No. Let's look at 7 qualities of a good leader. How often have you heard the comment, he or she is born a leader? There are certain characteristics found in some people that seem to naturally put them in positions where they're looked up to as leaders. Whether in fact a person is born a leader or develops skills and abilities to become a leader is open for debate. However, there are some clear characteristics that are found in good leaders. Let us explore them further. 7 personal qualities found in a good leader. 1. Trustworthiness. True authority is born from respect for the good character and trustworthiness of the person who leads. Leaders need to be trusted and be known to live their lives with honesty and integrity. A good leader walks the talk, and in doing so earns the right to have responsibility for others. Dedication. A good leader is enthusiastic about his or her work or cause, and also about his or her role as a leader. People will respond more openly to a person of passion and dedication. Leaders need to be able to be a source of inspiration and to be a motivator towards a required action or cause. Confidence. A good leader is confident. In order to lead and set direction, a leader needs to appear confident as a person and in the leadership role. Such a person inspires confidence in others and draws out the trust and best efforts of the team to complete the task well. Organizational skills. A leader also needs to function in an orderly and purposeful manner in situations of uncertainty. People look to the leader during times of uncertainty and unfamiliarity and find reassurance and security when the leader portrays confidence and a positive demeanor. Steadfastness. Good leaders are tolerant of ambiguity and remain calm, composed, and steadfast to the main purpose. Storms, emotions, crises come and go, and a good leader takes these as part of the journey and keeps a cool head. Analytical skills. Keeping the main goal in focus is able to think analytically. Not only is the goal in view, but a good leader can break it down into manageable steps and make progress towards it. Commitment. A good leader is committed to excellence. The good leader not only maintains high standards, but also is proactive in raising the bar in order to achieve excellence in all areas. These 7 personal characteristics are foundational to good leadership. Some characteristics may be more naturally present in the personality of a leader. However, each of these characteristics can also be developed and strengthened. Barbara White is an expert in educational leadership and president of Beyond Benefit. So, what they're going to want us to do is take these 7 qualities that come from this little excerpt and think about them in terms of Harriet Tubman and see if we can take evidence from this Harriet Tubman article and link it to any of those 7 characteristics. That's the right up here, analyzing complex text. That's what's complex about it. is these articles weren't aware of each other when they were written. They weren't meant to be together. But what we're going to do is compare and contrast and find similarities between the two. Okay, let me jump right in. The Railroad Runs to Canada, from Harriet Tubman, Conductor on the Underground Railroad, by Ann Petrie. Harriet Tubman was born into slavery in Maryland in 1820 and successfully escaped in 1849. Okay, do the math real quick. 1849 minus 1820 means she escaped when she was 29 years old. Rather than remaining in safety in the North, Harriet made it her mission to return to the South to rescue family members and others living in slavery via the Underground Railroad, an elaborate network of safe houses organized to help slaves reach free states. This excerpt documents what happened in 1851 when Harriet led 11 runaway slaves all the way to Canada. Along the eastern shore of Maryland, in Dorchester County and Caroline County, the masters kept hearing whispers about the man named Moses who was running off slaves. At first, they did not believe in his existence. The stories about him were fantastic, unbelievable, yet they watched for him. They offered rewards for his capture. They never saw him. Now and then they heard whispered rumors to the effect that he was in the neighborhood. The woods were searched. The roads were watched. There was never anything to indicate his whereabouts. But a few days afterward, a goodly number of slaves would be gone from the plantation. Neither the master nor the overseer had heard or seen anything unusual in the quarter. Sometimes one or the other would vaguely remember having heard a whippoorwill call somewhere in the woods, close by, late at night, though it was the wrong season for whippoorwills. There was never anything more than that to suggest that all was not well in the quarter. Yet, when morning came, they invariably discovered that a group of the finest slaves had taken their heels. That's a vocabulary thing. Or taken their heels just means left. Run away. Unfortunately, the discovery was almost always made on a Sunday. Thus, a whole day was lost before the machinery of pursuit could be set in motion. The posters offering rewards for the fugitives could not be printed until Monday. The men who made a living hunting for runaway slaves were out of reach, off in the woods with their dogs and their guns, in pursuit of four-footed game, or they were in camp meetings saying their prayers with their wives and families beside them. Harriet Tubman could have told them that there was far more involved in the matter of running off slaves than signaling the would-be runaways by imitating the call of a whippoorwill or a hoot owl, far more involved than a matter of waiting for a clear night when the North Star was visible. In December 1851, when she started out with the band of fugitives that she planned to take to Canada, she had been in the vicinity of the plantation for days, planning the trip, carefully selecting the slaves that she would take with her. She had announced her arrival in the quarter by singing the forbidden spiritual, "Go down, Moses, way down to Egypt land," singing it softly outside the door of a slave cabin late at night. The husky voice was beautiful, even when it was barely more than a murmur born on the wind. Once she had made her presence known, word of her coming spread from cabin to cabin. The slaves whispered to each other, ear to mouth to ear, "Moses is here. Moses has come. Get ready. Moses is back again." The ones who had agreed to go north with her put an ash cake and salt herring in an old bandana, hastily tied it into a bundle, and then waited patiently for the signal that meant it was time to start. There were 11 in this party, including one of her brothers and his wife. It was the largest group she had ever conducted, but she was determined that more and more slaves should know freedom, what freedom was like. She had to take them all the way to Canada. The fugitive slave law was no longer a great many incomprehensible words written down on the country's law books. The new law had become a reality. It was Thomas Sims, a boy, picked up on the streets of Boston at night and shipped back to Georgia. It was Jerry and Shadrach, arrested and jailed with no warning. She had never been in Canada. The route beyond Philadelphia was strange to her, but she could not let the runaways who accompanied her know this. As they walked along, she told them stories of her own first flight. She kept painting vivid word pictures of what it would be like to be free. But there were so many of them this time. She knew moments of doubt when she was half afraid and kept looking back over her shoulder, imagining that she heard the sound of pursuit. They would certainly be pursued. 11 of them. $11,000 worth of flesh and bone and muscle that belonged to Maryland planters. If they were caught, the 11 runaways would be whipped and sold south, but she would probably be hanged. They tried to sleep during the day, but they never could wholly relax into sleep. She could tell by the positions they assumed, by their restless movements. And they walked at night. Their progress was slow. It took them 3 nights of walking to reach the first stop. She had told them She had told them about the place where they would stay, promising warmth and good food, holding these things out to them as an incentive to keep going. When she knocked on the door of a farmhouse, a place where she and her parties of runaways had always been welcome, always been given shelter and plenty to eat, there was no answer. She knocked again, softly. A voice from within said, "Who is it?" There was fear in the voice. She knew instantly from the sound of the voice that there was something wrong. She said, "A friend, with friends." The password on the Underground Railroad. The door opened, slowly. The man who stood in the doorway looked at her coldly, looked with unconcealed astonishment and fear at the 11 disheveled runaways who were standing near her. Then he shouted, "Too many! Too many! It's not safe! My place was searched last week. It's not safe!" and slammed the door in her face. She turned away from the house, frowning. She had promised her passengers food and rest and warmth, and instead of that there would be hunger and cold and more walking over the frozen ground. Somehow she would have to instill courage into these 11 people, most of them strangers, would have to feed them on hope and bright dreams of freedom instead of the fried pork and cornbread and milk she had promised them. They stumbled along behind her, half dead for sleep, and she urged them on, though she was as tired and as discouraged as they were. She had never been in Canada, but she kept painting wondrous word pictures of what it would be like. She managed to dispel their fear of pursuit so that they would not become hysterical or panic-stricken. Then she had to bring some of the fear back, so they would stay awake and keep walking through though they drooped with sleep. Yet, during the day, when they laid back down in a thicket, they never really slept, because if a twig snapped, or the wind sighed in the branches of a pine tree, they jumped to their feet, afraid of their own shadows, shivering and shaking. It was very cold, but they dared not make fires because someone would see the smoke and wonder about it. That night they reached the next stop, a farm that belonged to a German. She made the runaways take shelter behind trees at the edge of the field before she knocked at the door. She hesitated before she approached the door, thinking, suppose that he too should refuse shelter. Suppose. Then she thought, Lord, I'm going to hold steady on to you, and you've got to see me through, and knocked softly. She heard the familiar guttural voice say, "Who's there?" She answered quickly, "A friend with friends." He opened the door and greeted her warmly. "How many this time?" he asked. 11, she said, and waited, doubting, wondering. He said, "Good. Bring them in." He and his wife fed them in the lamp-lit kitchen, their faces glowing as they offered food and more food, urging them to eat, saying there was plenty for everybody. Have more milk, have more bread, have more meat. They spent the night in the warm kitchen. They really slept all that night until dusk the next day. Then they left. When they left, it was with reluctance. They had all been warm and safe and well fed. It was hard to exchange the security offered by that clean, warm kitchen for the darkness and the cold of a December night. Go on or die. Harriet had found it hard to leave the warmth and friendliness too, but she urged them on. For a while, as they walked, they seemed to carry in them a measure of contentment. Some of this serenity and the cleanliness of that big warm kitchen lingered on inside them. But as they walked farther and farther away from the warmth and the light, the cold and the darkness entered into them. They fell silent, sullen, suspicious. She waited for the moment when some of them would turn mutinous. She told them about Frederick Douglass, the most famous of the escaped slaves, of his eloquence, of his magnificent appearance. Then she told them of her own first vain effort at running away, evoking the memory of that miserable life she had led as a child, reliving it for a moment in the telling. But they had been tired too long, hungry too long, afraid too long, footsore too long. One of them suddenly cried out in despair, "Let me go back. It is better to be a slave than to suffer like this just in order to be free." She carried a gun with her on these trips. She had never used it except as a threat. Now, as she aimed it, she experienced a feeling of guilt, remembering that time years ago when she had prayed for the death of Edward Brodus, the master, and then, not too long afterward, had heard that great wailing cry that came from the throats of field hands, and knew from the sound that the master was dead. One of the runaways said again, "Let me go back, let me go back," and stood still, and then turned around and said, over his shoulder, "I am going back." She lifted the gun, aimed it at the despairing slave. She said, "Go on with us, or die." The husky, low-pitched voice was grim. He hesitated for a moment, and then he joined the others. They started walking again. She tried to explain to them why none of them could go back to the plantation. If a runaway returned, he would turn traitor. The master and the overseer would force him to turn traitor. The returned slave would disclose the stopping places, the hiding places, the corn stacks that they had used to the full knowledge of the owner of the farm, the name of the German farmer who had fed them and sheltered them. These people who had risked their own security to help runaways would be ruined, fined, imprisoned. She said, "We got to go free or die, and freedom's not bought with dust." She gave the impression of being a short, muscular, indomitable woman who could never be defeated. Yet at any moment she was liable to be seized by one of those curious fits of sleep which might last for a few minutes or for hours. Even on this trip she suddenly fell asleep in the woods. The runaways, ragged, dirty, hungry, cold, did not steal the gun as they might have and set off by themselves or turn back. They sat on the ground near her and waited patiently until she awakened. They had come to trust her implicitly, totally. They too had come to believe her repeated statement, "We got to go free or die." She was leading them into freedom, and so they waited until she was ready to go on. By slow stages they reached Philadelphia. Harriet felt safer now, though there were danger spots ahead. But the biggest part of her job was over. As they went further and further north, it grew colder. She was aware of the wind on the Jersey ferry and aware of the cold damp in New York. From New York they went on to Syracuse, where the temperature was even lower. Late in December 1851, Harriet arrived in St. Catharines, Canada West, now called Ontario, with the 11 fugitives. It had taken almost a month to complete this journey. In spite of the severe cold, the hard work, she came to love St. Catharines and the other towns and cities in Canada where black men lived. She discovered that freedom meant more than the right to change jobs at will, more than the right to keep the money that one earned. It was the right to vote and to sit on juries. It was the right to be elected to office. In Canada, there were black men who were county officials and members of school boards. St. Catharines had a large colony of ex-slaves, and they owned their own homes, kept them neat and clean, in good repair. They lived in whatever part of town they chose, and sent their children to the schools. She continued to live in this fashion, spending the winter in Canada and the spring and summer working in Cape May, New Jersey, or in Philadelphia. She made 2 trips a year into slave territory, one in the fall and another one in spring. She now had a definite, crystallized purpose, and in carrying it out, her life fell into a pattern which remained unchanged for the next 6 years. Harriet Tubman remained active during the Civil War, working for the Union Army as an armed scout and spy. She was the first woman to lead an armed expedition in the war and helped to liberate more than 700 slaves. After the war, she helped to lead the fight for the abolition of slavery. Man, that was really good. I really enjoyed that. Okay, so the synthesis bit is to take evidence from that article and talk about these things. Trustworthiness. There was a line where it said they trusted her implicitly. They trusted her. They remember they laid down with her to let her sleep because they trusted her to get them to safety. Dedication. She stayed dedicated even though it was cold, even though they had been refused by one of the stops. She stayed dedicated to the task of getting them to freedom. Confidence. Boy, would have taken a lot of confidence to go back into slave territory and lead people. Organizational skills. This one really blows me away. Okay, so she didn't have um, like a cell phone or anything. She kept her direction in her own head. She knew where all the stops were. She remembered all the names. She kept all of this information of how to get a month's journey on foot in her head. That's organizational skills. That's crazy good organizational skills. Steadfastness. Steadfast. I'm not quite sure how different steadfast is from dedication. Um, but I guess, standing in the face of adversity, standing in the face of those fugitive slave laws, uh, would be a good example. Analytical skills, um, keeping a gun with her at all times, even though she doesn't usually use it, is that because she's analyzing the moment and expecting that she's going to need the gun at some point. And when she has to use it against her own people, that's rough. That takes some guts. It probably breaks your heart a little bit to aim the gun at one of your own people and say, "Come with us or die," and mean it. She means it. If you go back, you compromise the entire Underground Railroad. We can't have that. And then commitment, committed to excellence, high standards. Yeah, commitment to the bit, man. She keeps it going. She stays steadfast. She stays committed to the Underground Railroad for, it says, 6 years until the Civil War started, and then she got in the Civil War. So you could probably go back and find direct sentences for all of those. A summary might help because it's kind of long, but there you go. So that's the idea, is reading two things and finding similarities between them, using one as a guide for the other. Let's see. Should we do anything else? Flashcards. Central idea, I think, is a pretty obvious one. It's just the main idea, the reason the thing was written. Synthesize is to put together two separate things, to bring them together in a new way. All right, so that is the end of chapter 1, and I'll meet you in chapter 2.